Would you help someone in danger when you're in danger yourself? Malcolm did just that, rescuing a woman from a burning car while being chased by a racist mob. What happened next will amaze you. Like and subscribe to Seeds of Goodness for daily inspiration. Malcolm adjusted his tie for the 5th time since leaving the interview. The knot felt too tight against his throat, but he couldn't bring himself to loosen it. Not yet. The perfectly pressed navy suit and crisp white shirt were his armor, a statement to the world that he belonged in those gleaming downtown towers as much as anyone else, even if the world didn't always agree. "You're a perfect fit for our engineering team, Mr. Davis," the hiring manager had said, her smile genuine. "We'll be in touch very soon." He allowed himself a small smile as he walked down the rapidly darkening streets. At 28, with 2 advanced degrees in computer engineering, Malcolm should have been accustomed to success. Yet each victory still felt like pushing against an invisible barrier, one that others couldn't see, but he felt constantly. Checking his watch, Malcolm realized he might miss the last express bus if he took his usual route. The downtown area was emptying as offices closed, leaving the streets to evening revelers and those heading home. He pulled out his phone, quickly mapping an alternative path. A shortcut through Cedar Heights would save him 15 minutes. Cedar Heights. Malcolm hesitated. The neighborhood wasn't known for being particularly welcoming to people who looked like him after dark, but it was a weekday, just past 7 p.m. What were the chances of trouble? "Don't be paranoid," he muttered to himself, pocketing his phone and turning east toward the shortcut. The first few blocks were quiet, lined with small businesses already closed for the day. Malcolm walked briskly, his dress shoes clicking against the pavement. The sound seemed to echo, unnaturally loud in the growing silence. As he turned onto Elmwood Street, the atmosphere changed subtly. Neon signs buzzed overhead, and he could hear music and laughter spilling from a bar called The Watering Hole. As Malcolm approached, a group of men stood smoking outside, their conversation halting as he passed. He kept his eyes forward, his pace steady, neither hurrying nor dawdling. Just another professional heading home. "Hey, suit!" one of the men called out. "You lost?" Malcolm gave a brief, polite nod without slowing. "No, sir, just passing through." "Passing through," another voice mimicked. "Hear that, boys? He's just passing through our neighborhood." Malcolm's shoulders tensed, but he kept walking. Just another 100 feet and he'd be past them, around the corner, away from... "What's the rush, boy? Got somewhere important to be?" A large man with a ruddy face stepped into his path. The smell of whiskey hung heavy on his breath. "Excuse me," Malcolm said evenly, attempting to step around him. The man shifted, blocking him again. "I asked you a question. I'm just heading to the bus stop." Malcolm kept his voice calm, his posture non-threatening, all the while calculating distances, to the corner, back the way he came, to the bar door where a few curious faces had appeared. "Bus don't run through here," another man said, stepping closer. "You really are lost." Malcolm noticed more men emerging from the bar, drawn by the confrontation. 6, now 7 people surrounding him. A familiar dread settled in his stomach. The knowledge that reason and rights meant nothing in certain moments, to certain people. "Look, I don't want any trouble." He raised his hands slightly, palms out. "Should have thought about that before you came strutting through here like you own the place," the first man said, giving Malcolm a shove that made him step back. Malcolm's mind raced through options. Reason wasn't working. Standing his ground could escalate things. Running might trigger a chase response, but staying would definitely lead to violence. When the first punch was thrown, a wild, drunk swing that Malcolm easily dodged, the decision was made for him. He turned and ran. "Get him!" someone shouted, and the pack gave chase. Malcolm sprinted down side streets, his perfect interview suit now a hindrance. He yanked off his tie, discarded his suit jacket in some bushes as he ran. The dress shoes, expensive and rigid, bit into his heels, but there was no time to remove them. He was in good shape, but fear and adrenaline could only carry him so far. After several blocks, His lungs burned, and he could hear his pursuers gaining ground. The yells and jeers grew closer, punctuated by slurs that he'd heard too many times before. Turning down what he hoped would lead to a busier street, Malcolm found himself instead in a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. Worse, as he raced forward, he saw the high fence at the end, a dead end. He was trapped. As he spun around, ready to face whatever came next, a sudden screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal against concrete split the night. Just at the entrance to the alley, a small silver sedan had swerved to avoid something, perhaps one of his pursuers, and slammed headlong into a utility pole. For a moment, everything stopped. The shouts of his pursuers faded as everyone processed what had just happened. Malcolm stared at the crumpled hood of the car, his heart still pounding from the chase. Then he saw the flicker of orange beneath the hood, small at first, then growing rapidly. "Fire!" someone yelled from the street. Malcolm didn't think. He ran toward the car, not away from it. As he reached the driver's side, he could see a woman slumped over the wheel, a trickle of blood running down her forehead from impact with the windshield. The airbag had deployed but seemed to have knocked her unconscious, and the fire was spreading. He tried the door handle. Locked. The window was cracked from the impact, but not broken. With no time to waste, Malcolm removed his dress shoe and used the hard heel to strike the window near its edge, where the glass was weakest. It took 3 hard hits before the window shattered. "Hey!" he heard someone shout from the entrance of the alley. His pursuers had arrived, momentarily distracted by the accident but now remembering their target. Ignoring them, Malcolm reached through the broken window, unlocked the door, and wrenched it open. The heat from the growing engine fire hit him in a wave as he leaned in to unbuckle the woman's seatbelt. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with short dark hair and a face that, even unconscious, looked somehow determined. Come on," he muttered, struggling with the jammed buckle. The smoke was thickening, making it harder to breathe, harder to see. Finally, the buckle released with a click. Malcolm gently pulled the woman from the car, lifting her into his arms. She was slight but dead weight in her unconscious state. He staggered back from the car, his lungs burning from exertion and smoke. Just as they cleared the immediate vicinity, a whoosh of flame engulfed the engine compartment entirely. He carefully laid the woman down several yards away from the burning vehicle, checking her pulse and breathing. Both were steady. The cut on her forehead didn't look too deep, but head injuries could be deceptive. "Wake up," he urged, lightly tapping her cheek. "Please wake up. We need to move," because the danger wasn't over. Malcolm glanced up to see his pursuers, now 5 men, standing at the alley entrance, momentarily held at bay by the burning car but clearly reconsidering their options. One pointed toward a narrow passage between buildings that would let them bypass the fire. The woman in his arms stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Sharp, alert eyes that quickly focused on his face, then darted to the burning car, then to the men at the alley entrance. "What happened?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady for someone who had just regained consciousness. "Car accident. Fire. And those men," Malcolm began. "Are chasing you," she finished, sitting up with a wince. "Yes. We need to move. Can you stand?" She nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. "I'm Zoe," she said, as if they'd met at a coffee shop rather than a burning alley. "Malcolm." "Well, Malcolm," she said, steadying herself against him while pulling out a phone that had somehow survived the crash intact. "I think we both might need a little help right now." Zoe's fingers moved across her phone screen with remarkable precision for someone who had just survived a car crash. Her focus was intense, almost detached from their dire circumstances. "Those men," she said without looking up. "They're after you because—" And Malcolm tensed as he watched the group at the end of the alley begin to edge around the burning car. "Because I walked through their neighborhood looking like this," he said, gesturing to his skin. Zoe glanced up, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. There was no pity in her gaze, just understanding and something else. Calculation. Give me 30 seconds, she said, returning to her phone. We don't have 30 seconds, Malcolm replied, eyeing the approaching men. The narrow passage they'd found would bring them to Malcolm and Zoe's position in less than a minute. We need to run. Where? Zoe asked calmly. Dead end behind us, angry mob in front. Trust me, running isn't our best option right now. She was right. Malcolm looked around desperately for a weapon, something to defend them with. He picked up a broken piece of pipe lying near a dumpster. It felt pathetically inadequate. You rescued me, Zoe said, still tapping on her phone. Now it's my turn. What exactly do you do? Malcolm asked, splitting his attention between her and the approaching threat. A hint of a smile appeared on Zoe's face. I break into places for a living. Legally, of course. You're a thief? Cybersecurity consultant, she corrected. Companies hire me to find vulnerabilities in their systems. I was just finishing a job when I took that corner too fast. Fortunately, she held up her phone triumphantly. I still have access to my client's systems. The men were halfway through the narrow passage now, their voices growing louder, more aggressive. One was brandishing what looked like a tire iron. And how does that help us? Malcolm asked, gripping the pipe tighter. My client is BrightSafe Security Systems, Zoe explained. They provide security infrastructure for this entire district, including... She made one final tap on her screen. Emergency protocols. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the night exploded into chaos. Every alarm system within a 3-block radius activated simultaneously. Ear-splitting sirens wailed from storefronts and apartments. Emergency lights flashed from buildings, turning the dark alley into a disorienting strobe of red and white. Most surprisingly, sprinkler systems and fire suppression equipment engaged, sending jets of water spraying down from nearby buildings. The effect on their pursuers was immediate. Caught in the narrow passage between buildings, disoriented by the sudden cacophony and drenched by sprinklers, they panicked. What the hell? It's the cops! Someone must have called in the fire. Let's get out of here! Malcolm watched in astonishment as the men scrambled back the way they had come, slipping and sliding on the suddenly wet pavement. Within seconds, they had disappeared, more afraid of being caught than determined to continue their pursuit. That, Malcolm said, lowering the pipe, was impressive. Zoe shrugged, then winced at the movement. Basic emergency override, though I did add a little personal touch with the sprinklers. She pocketed her phone and examined her ruined car with a frown. Unfortunately, I think my insurance rates are about to skyrocket. In the distance, real sirens began to blend with the alarms. Someone really had called about the fire, and emergency services were responding. We should get out of here, Malcolm said, suddenly aware that being found at the scene of such chaos might bring its own problems. Zoe nodded, taking a step forward before her legs buckled. Malcolm caught her before she hit the ground. Sorry, she said, pressing a hand to her temple. Apparently crashing into a utility pole has some side effects. You might have a concussion, Malcolm said, supporting her weight. You need a hospital. No hospitals, Zoe said firmly. Just somewhere to sit down for a bit. My apartment isn't far from here. Malcolm glanced at the alley entrance. The wail of approaching sirens was getting louder, but their pursuers were long gone. Can you walk? With some help, Zoe admitted. He put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him as they made their way out of the alley, moving in the opposite direction from the approaching emergency vehicles. As they emerged onto a side street, Malcolm realized he was missing a shoe and his suit jacket. His white shirt was smudged with soot and blood, and he was supporting a woman who looked equally disheveled. They made quite a pair. Turn left here, Zoe directed. 3rd building down. They moved in awkward tandem, Malcolm navigating around puddles created by the still-running sprinkler systems while supporting Zoe's weight. The chaos they'd left behind was fading, though alarms continued to sound in the distance. Zoe's building was a renovated factory, all exposed brick and large windows. She punched a code into the door panel, and they entered a sparse industrial lobby. 4th floor, she said, nodding toward the elevator. Inside her apartment, Malcolm was struck by the contrast between the building's rough exterior and the sophisticated, minimalist space Zoe called home. One wall was dominated by computer screens, while the rest of the open-plan living area featured sleek furniture and surprisingly normal touches: plants, books, a half-empty mug of coffee on the kitchen counter. "Bathroom's through there," Zoe said, pointing to a door. "First aid kit under the sink. Could you—" "Of course," Malcolm said, helping her to the couch before retrieving the kit. As he cleaned the cut on her forehead, Malcolm found himself processing the last hour, the interview, the chase, the burning car, and now this surreal domestic scene with a woman who had quite possibly saved his life. "So," he said, applying an antiseptic wipe to the wound, "you hack security systems for a living." "Among other things," Zoe replied, her eyes fixed on him with that same evaluating look. "You're remarkably calm for someone who was nearly beaten by a mob less than an hour ago." Malcolm's hands stilled momentarily. "It's not the first time I've been in a situation like that." "The nearly getting beaten part, or the rescuing damsels from burning cars part?" "The first one," Malcolm said, a hint of darkness crossing his face. "Though usually I don't have someone turning on the neighborhood sprinkler system to save me." Zoe smiled, then winced as the movement pulled at her cut. "Happy to help. Though I think we're even. Life for a life." "I don't think they would have killed me," Malcolm said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "And I might have escaped that car on my own," Zoe countered, also not sounding entirely convinced. A moment of silence fell between them as Malcolm finished cleaning the wound and applied a butterfly bandage. "You should still see a doctor," he advised. "Concussions can be serious." "I know," Zoe said. "I'll call my personal physician in the morning. He's discreet." Malcolm raised an eyebrow at that but didn't press. Everyone had their reasons for avoiding hospitals and official reports. "What about you?" Zoe asked. "Any injuries I should know about?" Malcolm did a mental inventory. "Just some scrapes from breaking your window, and a missing shoe." "Sorry about that." "I'm not," Malcolm said firmly. "Small price to pay." Zoe leaned back against the couch cushions, studying him. "You were coming from somewhere important," she said. "The suit. The tie, though I notice that's gone too." "Job interview. Software engineering position at Ray Tech." "Did you get it?" Malcolm smiled wryly. "They said they'd be in touch very soon." "They'd be idiots not to hire you," Zoe said. "Not many software engineers would know to hit a car window at its weakest point to break it efficiently." "Not many cybersecurity consultants could hack an entire neighborhood security system with a concussion," Malcolm countered. They shared a smile. The tension of the evening briefly dissolved by mutual respect. A vibration from Zoe's phone interrupted the moment. She checked the screen and frowned. "Traffic cameras picked up the fire. It's already on local news sites." Malcolm moved to the window, suddenly aware that he was in a stranger's apartment, his face potentially on camera at the scene of an incident that had triggered a neighborhood-wide security response. "I should go," he said. "Why?" Zoe asked, setting down her phone. "The footage is too grainy to identify either of us, and the security system activation is being attributed to a malfunction triggered by the car fire." "You can tell that already?" "I have alerts set up. Occupational necessity," she explained. Then, more softly, "Stay, at least until we're sure those guys aren't still looking for you." Malcolm hesitated, years of ingrained caution warring with practical considerations. He was missing a shoe. His appearance would attract exactly the kind of attention he didn't need right now. And honestly, he was exhausted, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. "I can offer you dinner," Zoe added. "It's the least I can do for my rescuer, though full disclosure it'll probably be takeout. Nearly dying has killed my motivation to cook." Despite everything, Malcolm laughed. There was something about Zoe's matter-of-fact approach to their shared trauma that cut through the tension he'd been carrying all evening. All his life, really. "Takeout sounds perfect," he said, finally moving away from the window. "Though, I insist on paying. It's the least I can do for my rescuer. As Zoe pulled up a delivery app on her phone, Malcolm caught her giving him that evaluating look again. But this time he realized it wasn't wariness or calculation he was seeing in her eyes. It was recognition. 3 hours later, the coffee table in Zoe's apartment was littered with empty Thai food containers, and Malcolm was explaining the security architecture he'd designed for his previous employer. The problem wasn't just external threats, he said, sketching a diagram on a napkin. It was the compartmentalization within the company itself. Different departments couldn't collaborate effectively because of over-aggressive security protocols. Zoe nodded, examining his sketch. Let me guess, the solution wasn't actually technical, was it? Malcolm looked up, surprised. How did you know? Because the hardest problems rarely are, she said with a knowing smile. Technology is the easy part. It's people and their competing priorities that make security challenging. The conversation had flowed easily once they'd moved past the immediate shock of their encounter. They'd discovered a shared language, not just of code and systems, but of navigating worlds designed with barriers. My solution was a tiered authentication system with conditional access, Malcolm continued. But more importantly, I had to convince the department heads that security wasn't about building walls, but creating appropriate gates. Politics, Zoe said with a slight grimace. The bane of every good technical solution. Says the woman who hacked an entire neighborhood's security system while concussed. Zoe tapped her forehead gently, careful to avoid the bandaged cut. I prefer to think of it as a creative application of existing infrastructure. They shared a laugh, but Malcolm didn't miss how Zoe winced slightly at the movement. Despite her protests, he was still concerned about her head injury. How are you feeling? He asked. Any dizziness? Nausea? I'm fine, Doctor. Davis, she said with gentle mockery. Just tired. It's been an eventful evening. Malcolm glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was nearly midnight. I should probably go. You need rest, and I've imposed long enough. You're not imposing, Zoe said quickly. And I'd feel better knowing you got home safely. The statement hung between them, a reminder of why they were here in the first place. I can call a rideshare, Malcolm said, though I'm not sure how to explain my missing shoe and general dishevelment to the driver. I have a better idea, Zoe said, standing carefully. She disappeared into what Malcolm assumed was her bedroom, returning a moment later with a small duffel bag. Change of clothes. My brother's. He crashes here sometimes when he's in town. Malcolm accepted the bag with a mixture of gratitude and awkwardness. Thank you, that's very thoughtful. Bathroom's all yours, and I have spare shoes by the door. They might not be your style, but they'll get you home. When Malcolm emerged from the bathroom in borrowed jeans and a plain black t-shirt, he found Zoe at her computer station, the screens illuminating her profile with a blue glow. Checking on our digital footprint? He asked. She nodded without turning. No official reports connecting us to the incident. The fire department is attributing the security system activation to a fault triggered by the car crash, just as I predicted. And the men who were chasing me? No reports of any disturbance before the car fire, she said, swiveling her chair to face him. Either no one called it in, or they've faced no consequences. Unfortunately typical. Malcolm wasn't surprised. He'd learned long ago that some threats remained invisible to the systems supposedly designed to protect everyone. You look better, Zoe commented, gesturing to the clothes. Less like you escaped a disaster movie. I feel better, Malcolm admitted, though better wasn't quite right. Different, perhaps. Transformed in some subtle way he couldn't articulate. Zoe stood and crossed to a small side table where she retrieved a business card. Here, she said, handing it to him. My professional contact information. The card was minimalist, just her name, Zoe Chen, security consultant, and a phone number. No company, no address. In case you ever need to trigger another neighborhood-wide security alert, Malcolm asked with a slight smile. In case you want to continue our conversation, she replied. About security architecture, or anything else. Malcolm reached for his wallet to offer his own card in return, then remembered he'd left his jacket. With his wallet, in some bushes several blocks away. "I don't have my cards with me," he said, "but I'd like to continue our conversation." "I assumed," Zoe said, handing him a pen. "Write your number." As Malcolm jotted his number on a scrap of paper, a notification chimed from one of Zoe's computers. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting to one of focused intensity. "What is it?" Malcolm asked, recognizing the subtle change in her demeanor. "I set up a search algorithm after we talked," she explained, moving back to her workstation, "looking for patterns of incidents similar to what happened to you tonight." Malcolm joined her at the screens, where a map of the city was now displayed, certain areas highlighted in red. "These are reports of harassment and assaults with potential racial motivation in the last 6 months," Zoe explained. "The official police reports are in blue. The social media mentions and community forum posts are in yellow." The difference was stark. Blue dots were sparse, concentrated in certain neighborhoods. Yellow markers created dense clusters across much broader areas. "There's a significant reporting gap," Malcolm observed, professional analysis temporarily displacing personal reaction. "More than that," Zoe said, typing rapidly to bring up additional data. "There's a pattern. Look at the timestamps and locations." Malcolm studied the information, his mind quickly organizing the data points. "These incidents, they're not random. They're concentrated around specific events, specific time periods." "Exactly," Zoe confirmed. "And when I cross-reference with local bar closing times, sporting events, and certain calendar dates, it becomes predictable," Malcolm finished, seeing the pattern emerge. A chill ran down his spine as he recognized what they were looking at. Not just a documentation of past violence, but a potential forecast of future threats. They worked together seamlessly for the next hour, Zoe writing code to refine the search parameters, while Malcolm applied analytical frameworks to interpret the results. The borrowed clothes, the late hour, the strange circumstances of their meeting, all faded into the background as they focused on the problem before them. Finally, Zoe sat back, rubbing her eyes. "We should package this. The visualization alone tells a powerful story." "But who would we send it to?" Malcolm asked. "The police? Local government?" "Both," Zoe said. "Plus community organizations, advocacy groups, and the press. Numbers are harder to ignore than individual reports." Malcolm nodded slowly, considering the implications. "It's a start, but data alone won't change behavior." "No," Zoe agreed. "But it might change awareness." And that's step 1. She saved their work and closed the program, the screens dimming to standby mode. In the sudden relative darkness, Malcolm was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, and how quickly they'd moved from strangers to collaborators. "It's late," Zoe said softly. "I've called you a car. It should be here in 5 minutes." "Thank you," Malcolm replied, "for everything. Not many people would have done what you did tonight." "I could say the same about you," she countered. "Most people would have run past that burning car, not toward it." They moved to the door, the moment stretching between them, the peculiar intimacy of shared danger, of seeing someone's reflexive choices under extreme circumstances. "I have an interview with BrightSafe Security Systems next week," Malcolm said suddenly. "Your client," Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "They're expanding their corporate security division, looking for someone with both technical skills and experience navigating complex organizational structures." "You should take it," Zoe said without hesitation. "They're good people, and they clearly need better testing protocols if I manage to access their emergency systems that easily while concussed." Malcolm laughed. "I'll be sure to mention that in my interview." His phone buzzed with a notification that his ride was arriving. "About what we found tonight," Malcolm said, gesturing toward the computers. "I'd like to continue working on it, if you're interested." "I am," Zoe said. "Very much so." "Coffee? Tomorrow? Or, I guess, technically later today?" "Make it lunch," Zoe said. "I have a feeling I'm going to need the extra sleep." "Lunch it is," Malcolm agreed. He hesitated at the door. "This isn't how I expected my evening to go when I left that interview." "Mine either," Zoe said with a wry smile. "But I'm not complaining about the outcome." As Malcolm stepped into the hallway, Zoe called after him one last time. Malcolm, I think Raytech would be idiots not to hire you. But if they don't... Yes? BrightSafe would be lucky to have someone who runs toward burning cars. He smiled, understanding what she was really saying. Sometimes the most important job qualifications weren't on any resume. Good night, Zoe. Good night, Malcolm. As the elevator doors closed, Malcolm reflected on the strange sequence of events that had led him here. Just hours ago, he'd been running for his life, marked as an outsider, a target. Now he was leaving with new clothes, a new professional connection, and possibly a new direction. The world hadn't changed. The men who chased him were still out there. The barriers and prejudices remained firmly in place. But something had shifted, nevertheless. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with an email notification. He glanced at the preview. Raytech Industries. Thank you for your interview. Whatever the email contained, Malcolm realized, it suddenly felt less consequential than it had this morning. Tonight had reminded him of something important, that sometimes the most meaningful paths forward came from the darkest alleys, and that connections forged in crisis could illuminate possibilities no carefully planned career move ever would. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Malcolm stepped out into the quiet lobby. Through the front doors, he could see his rideshare waiting at the curb, and beyond it, the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky. He straightened his borrowed clothes, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the new day.